Hello, ma'am.
Yes. Rita ma'am, please.
Hello, Bindu ma'am. Hello. Am I audible, ma'am? Am
Yes.
I audible to you? Ma'am,
Yes.
did you ask something? Some question which we were not able to follow. Can you just repeat, ma'am?
Pardon?
You asked something, ma'am, just before you asked something and it was not clear. Can you just repeat it for us?
Somebody named Shruti was she raised the hand, so I thought that maybe some because of some reason,
Okay. It might be by
or
mistake,
maybe
maybe,
by
ma'am.
mistake. She has
Yeah,
left the
yeah.
meeting also.
Okay, okay,
So
ma'am.
I think
When she
I
joined back,
initially I
we'll just.
thought she may be trying to say something. So it
Okay,
was
okay.
not
Some
like that.
query.
Okay, we'll continue.
Okay, ma'am. We can continue.
What about my screen? Is it
Screen is visible, ma'am. It is visible, ma'am.
okay? Okay. So we'll start with a tiny OS, the history of tiny OS. So in 1999, the first tiny OS platform and OS implementations was developed at the Berkeley. Later on, different versions of tiny OS were developed as and when they were dealing with the OS. In 2000, tiny OS version 0.43, it was made available to the public, and in 2011 they have developed the Berkeley, they have developed the Mica platform, and they have released the tinyOS version 0.6. In 2012 February, they have distributed these 1,000 nodes to other participants in the Nest project, and it goes on. In April, work on Nessie programming language was actually begin in collaboration with the Intel Research. Why? Because this language is being used for the or OIS for the OIS implementation. It was written in Nessie. So in September 2002, TinyOS version 1, it was implemented in Nessie. It was released. Later on, it goes on, and in 2005, TinyOS begins a periodic minor release process, and day by day it goes on. So in June 2004, the next step for the TinyOS, they have based on the experience porting to new platforms. Then finally, it has reached in 2012, TinyOS 2.1.2 is being released, and the later details I have not included here. So let us see what is TinyOS. I've already said that TinyOS is the operating platform and operating implementation which was for the sensor networks, or you say for the limited devices. You want an OS with different design capability, or capabilities of that OS must be different from us that of your relevant OSs or Windows or something. So what are the broad requirements motivating the design of a tiny OS? What are all the things which motivated for a new design of a tiny OS? Now, we were in the morning session, we were dealing with all those limited resources, or the devices which have some limited resources. So those modes were actually having limited physical resources. Now, small size, low cost, and low power consumption. Then another factor is reactive concurrency. In a typical sensor network application, this particular node is responsible for the sampling aspects of its environment, and that through the sensors. See, the sensor or this particular node will be collecting all those informations through these sensors, and it will be manipulating it through the actuators and they will perform a local data processing. They will transmit the data, route the data for others, and these nodes will be participating in various distributed processing tasks. And some are the statistical aggregation, feature recognition, different types of processing tasks are also there. So many of these events, it requires real-time responses. So they want to react in real-time responses also. And the next factor is flexibility. A flexible OS, it must have both application specific to reduce the space and power, and it must be independent of the boundary between the hardware and the software. And it should support fine-grained modularity and interpositioning to simplify the reuse and innovation. And the last point is low power. So it must work in extremely low power operation, which will provide a great deal of flexibility in power management, and some sort of duty cycle strategies must be there. So these are the motivating factors for designing a tiny OS. So we'll see the component model of this tiny OS. The programming model of this tiny OS is provided actually by the Nessie language. The Nessie will be seen after tiny OS. It centers around the notion of components that encapsulate a specific set of services, and it is specified by the interfaces. So these two components, that is the components as well as the components, means it is the set of services which we are having, and that services will be specified by the interfaces. Now, the tiny OS, it consists of a set of reusable system components along with a task scheduler. Reusable components, what is a task scheduler? These details I don't want to explain, you know. Then, when you come to an application, when it connects these components using a wiring specification, it is independent of component implementation. That the specification will be different from the implementation. Implementation on one side and the specification will be on the wiring specification will be on the other side. So a component is having two classes of interfaces. Those it provides, what it is providing, and what it is using. Then interfaces will define how the component, each and every component, directly interacts with other components. We have said that number of components will be there. So the interface will specify how they are going to communicate or interact with each other. These interfaces are bidirectional, and it contains both commands and events. When you give a command, correspondingly, or at a later time, it can happen some events also. So command is a function implemented by the providers of an interface. What are the things to be done by using this one? And an event is a function that is implemented by its users. So this is about the component model of tiny OS. Now the computational concepts. I've said about events and commands and tasks. And what are the things? Events are time critical. It is caused by the interrupts and for a short duration. Commands, it requests to a component to perform a particular service. For example, you can say that start sensor reading the temperature or the humidity is being read, or start the video and frame by frame let it be transmitted, like that. So to perform a particular service, that is the command. Then this can be non-blocking, that is it need to return the status and then postpone time. You can postpone the time consuming work by posting a task. See, previously also we have said that if this is not going to be executed, or some sort of, if the services are not at all available, you can postpone that one. And this is done by posting a task. Then it can call lower level commands. And about the task, the time is flexible, that means delayed processing. That if you are posting a task, the thing will be executed later only, and this will be run sequentially by the task scheduler, run to completion with respect to other tasks. It can be preempted by events. So this is the TinyOS execution model. Now, TinyOS state, if there is nothing executing, it will be in the sleep state. And when one event is happening, and then one T1 is posted, so task T1 is going to execute. So execute during the execution, another task 2, it is being posted. So what happened? This much time task 1 has been executing. In a later time, another event 2 is happening, and then another task 2 is executing. So when it is posted, task 1 has already completed the service, so there is no problem. Task 2 will be going to execute. So during the execution period of this task 2, another T3 or it is posting a T3, so it is not at all executing, and the task will be executed later. And when it is completed, it will be in the state. So duration of that, or during the time, number of tasks will be executed. Now the concurrency. So there are two threads of execution. The task, it is the deferred execution. We can say that it can be postponed, and this task cannot preempt other tasks. One task cannot preempt the other task, and there will be a hardware event handler. It responds to the interrupts. Then interrupts can be preempted, can preempt the task. See, suppose during the execution something is happening, an interrupt can preempt that particular task. So these all concepts we know from the other OS itself. And there will be a scheduler. It comes in the 2-level scheduling, because we want to schedule the interrupts as well as the task also. So 2-level scheduling, you have your interrupts and the task. Now, how the task is maintained? The task queue is actually in FIFO, first in, first out order. So the scheduler will be putting the processor to sleep when no event or command is running and the task queue is empty. TinyOS execution, how the events and tasks are being executed. Now, what are the consequences of an event? When an event is happening, you can say that something can run to completion, or it can preempt a task. Now, what can an event do? It can signal, it can call command, it can post a task. So these are the things which can be done by the event. What are the consequences of a task? Now, no preemption mechanism has been there for the task. One task cannot preempt the other task. So you must keep your code as small execution pieces that do not block other tasks too long, because for a longer time, if it is being blocked, we actually need real-time responses, is it? So it is not that. In that way you have to maintain it. So to run a long operation, you create a separate task for each operation rather than using a big task. So you divide that into different and you can execute that one. Then what can initiate actually this or post a task? A command, event, or another task can initiate a post or another task. So this is the architecture of the TinyOS. Now, domain-specific application components are there. This TinyOS, it falls under the monolithic architecture. You know that as a whole, it is being dealt with. A monolithic architecture is there. It uses the component model. We have seen what is a component model. And according to the requirements of an application, different components are glued together with a scheduler to compose a static image that runs on that particular mode. So which all components are there and how it is going to work or how it is going to execute, the scheduler will be composing a static image and that will be run or will be executed in the mode. A component, I've already said, it is an independent computational entity that exposes one or more interfaces. Components have three computational abstractions that already we have seen: commands, events, and tasks. Now, the mechanism for inter-component communication are by the help of these commands and events. And here the tasks are used to express the intra-component concurrency. Now, a command, actually it is a request to perform some service, while the event will be signaling the completion of the service. TinyOS is providing a single shared stack and there is no separation between the kernel space and the user space. So that you know what is a kernel space and the user space, there is no separation. How it is being maintained, it is being, that is why the kernel, it won't preempt the other one. Programming model, TinyOS version 2.1, it provides multi-threading. That is, those threads can be there. The previous version didn't have that multi-threading capability. So those threads use a cooperative threading approach for the programming. See, application level threads, they can preempt other application level threads only. It cannot preempt tasks and interrupt handlers. High priority kernel thread is dedicated to running the TinyOS scheduler. The communication between the application threads and the kernel, for the communication, it is using a message passing. Now, when an application program makes a system call, it does not directly execute that call. It actually posts a message to the kernel thread by posting a task. The kernel thread will preempt the running thread and execute the system call. Only the kernel directly execute the TinyOS code. So those threads dynamically allocate the thread control blocks, that is TCB, with space for a fixed size stack and does not grow over time. These TOS threads, context switches, and system calls introduce an overhead of less than 0.92% only. You know, when we are having this context switches and all, there will be a slight overhead will be there. So it is only 0.92%. Earlier versions of TinyOS imposed atomicity, that is regarding the disabling the interrupts by the help of that one. See, this was working well on uniprocessor systems, and critical sections can occur in the user level threads. The other one, it is not allowed. So TinyOS version 2.1, it is providing synchronization support with the help of conditional variables and mutexes. And it is implemented with a special hardware instruction. We have already seen with the test and set instruction. So with that one, the synchronization was actually done, the test and set instruction. Now, regarding the scheduling in the TinyOS, earlier versions of TinyOS was doing non-preemptive FIFO scheduling algorithm. It does not support real-time application. And the core of the TinyOS execution models are tasks that run to completion in a FIFO manner. Memory management and protection of this TinyOS. See, the sensor node, it is hardware-based memory protection is not available and resources are scarce in the case. The TinyOS version 2.1, memory safety is actually incorporated. See, it will be trapping all pointers and array errors, provide useful diagnosis, and provide recovery strategies. And how we are going to trap all the pointers and array errors, we know in the normal OS how we are going to trap the call to that one. So similarly, such a mechanism is done here also. So how we can program this tiny OS with the help of NESSI? NESSI, it is a dialect of C. It is a component-based, event-driven programming language to build applications for the tiny OS platform. Now the component, as previously in the thing we have seen that components will be connecting via the interfaces, and the process is known as wiring. How we are going to connect to the other one. So NESSI application, one or more components are assembled or wired. It will form an application executable. So the components and the corresponding interfaces, they will be wired, and it will be able to execute something. So it will be executable one. So for the components, there are two scopes. One for their specification, which contains the name of their interfaces, and a second scope is for their implementation. A component will provide and uses the interfaces. Data types and data structures, these are all things which are not at all necessary, but if you want, you can just go through this one. The data types which are available here. Number of operators, all those things which just we can skip on these or just go through this one. So the statements, if and the if else statements will be similar to the C, while and do while also similar to C, and for loop also. Then for a command call, it is you call, you specify, the syntax will be for the event signal, for the task post, like that there will be differences. Like, main things are the constructs are similar or comparatively similar with the C. Now the design of NESSI. We have already seen that NESSI applications, they are built out of components with well-defined bidirectional interfaces. What are the basic principles for the design of a NESSI? It is actually an extension of C or dialect of C. Now we know that C will be producing efficient code for all the target microcontrollers that are likely to be used in the sensor networks. And the concept of whole program analysis is there. NESSI programs are subject to whole program analysis, and it is for safety and optimization, that is for the performance. That is, separate compilation in NESSI's design, it is not considered. So it is because of the limited program size on mode that is making this approach possible one. So you must not contain different components. Even though the components are there, it is very small one, and the separate compilation is not at all possible. And NESSI is a static language. All resources are known at the compile time itself. Otherwise, you won't be able to do that one. And call graph is fully known at the compile time. And it supports and reflects the tiny OS's design. Corresponding to that one, what is the property of the tiny OS design that will be supported by NESSI? It is based on the concept of components, and it supports the tiny OS event-based concurrency model. Component implementation. There are two types of components in NESSI: modules and configurations. Modules are providing application code, implementing one or more interfaces. These configurations are used to wire other components together, connecting interfaces used by components to interfaces provided by others. Every NESSI application is described by a top-level configuration that wires together components which we are using. The body of a module, it is written in C-like code with a straightforward extensions. A command or event F in an interface I is named as I.F. Command call is like a regular function call prefixed with the keyword call. An event signal is like a function called prefixed by the signal. So these are the design decisions for NESI, the components, bidirectional interfaces, simple expressive concurrency model, and the whole program analysis. And about the components, I've already said which are the module components. Modules will be implementing the application code. It have a private state. It shares the data among components. Sharing of data means one component, when you want to share with the data, if you want, you can do it by the other method only. So the sharing of data means in the physical way it is not at all possible. What the convention used in module, it will be the module names with em, that is it will be ending with em. See, blink, if it is for blink, it is blink em. It is only a convention, you don't want to do it like that. The module variables are starting with like this em, then a hyphen. So if it is for a timer, m hyphen timers, like that. This is only convention. So configuration components. See, these configurations via other components together. These are going to wire the other components. These applications have a top level configuration. The component interface may be wired 0 or more times. And the convention for naming, it is, if the module is ending with em, this configuration will be ending with c. That is,
Oh,
if
yeah.
it is a timer, it is timer c.
FTP.
Excuse me. Yes. Hello.
Ma'am, you can continue. It may happen by mistake.
Okay. Okay. So this is only an example of a module and a configuration. So see, from the name you can identify that this is a module, and this module is Blink EM. It provides an interface, the details. This is a program which is written, or the code which is written for Blink and the corresponding configuration. So the implementation side, how it is being, the further details is not at all actually needed, because the programming concept is not covered that much in the module. It's only for small sections. So how to program, how to write a program, that is also not necessary. I think that is not actually included. The idea is only included. So about the whole program analysis, we have seen that the compilation can examine the complete call graph. You cannot compile it individually. So it will be eliminating the costly module boundary crossings and inline small functions. Then you need a backend C compiler can optimize the whole program. It allows detection of race conditions also. And how to detect the race conditions? Asynchronous code as well as synchronous code is there. So asynchronous code, you say that code is which is reachable from at least one interrupt handler. So the events will be signaled directly or indirectly by hardware interrupts. Other than these two, everything coming under this one is specified. That is the synchronous code. So the synchronous code SC is atomic with respect to other SC. Now the two claims about updates for this one, AC and SC, will be, see, suppose if there is any update to a shared state from AC, and it will come to a potential race condition. You know what is a race condition? Simultaneously, when you are coming, and what about the execution order of execution? So any update to a shared state from an asynchronous or something like this will be coming into a race condition, and any update to shared state from SC that is also updated from AC will be also a potential race condition. So the updates to the shared state is either SC only or it can be done in an atomic section. Then there won't be any race conditions. So how to deal with these race conditions? Now you know the making things atomic will be reducing that one, is it? So use your atomic sections to update the shared state, or you can convert the code with updates to shared state to task. So by dealing like this, you can deal the race conditions. And there are some issues with NESI. Problem for data shared across components. Problem for data shared between split phase operations. If it is split phase operation, it is by the two sections. So in that one, the event can potentially fire if other components are accessing the hardware. And some tiny OS idioms are not well expressed here. So these are the issues for NESI when we come with your tiny OS. So that is all the sections about your tiny OS and NESI. Now we'll see the embedded device programming languages. The programming languages in the embedded programming domain, 80% are implemented in C and its corresponding flavors. Why? Because of the the performance, the small memory footprint, access to low level hardware, availability of the trained C programmers, short learning curve, and compiler support for the vast majority of devices. So due to that one, this 80% of the thing is actually implemented in the C and its flavors. So NASI, we already seen that one. Correspondingly, KeelZ, it is widely used for the embedded devices. It supports two types of pointers. I have included only the very small points only. So one is the type of pointers which is supported by KeelZ. It is generic pointers. It can access any variable regardless of its location. Then memory specific pointers also, it can access variables stored in data memory. Another language, Dynamic C, the key features is function chaining and cooperative multitasking. So that means the segments of code can be distributed in one or more functions through function chaining. So whenever a function chain is executing, all the segments belonging to that particular chain will be executing. Functions chains can be used to perform data initialization, data recovery, and other kinds of special tasks as decided by the programmer. Cooperative multitasking. It provides multiple threads of control through independent program counters that can be switched in between explicitly. So these are the features of Dynamic C. Then Bhash, it is another multi-threaded programming language, and this is for the constrained systems. The features they are actually derived from languages like Java, C++, and C#. So other important features, they are device addressing registers and explicit support for interrupt handlers are provided. So according to these, whichever language you are going to use, that you can decide. These are the languages which are provided. Now, how we already said that these devices will be communicating each other, or how to communicate, that is by the message passing. So which are the message passing? RPC. Now I think RPC is already known to you. It will be giving abstraction for procedure calls across languages, platforms, and protection mechanisms. For IoT, this RPC can support communication between devices as it implements the request response communication pattern. We know we are already doing the request response method for this IoT. So RPC can support that one. Then lightweight remote procedure call. It is designed for optimized communication between production domains in the same machine, but not across the machines. Then this RPC, it was incorporated into the Tiny OS. Another thing is REST. It will simplify the web application development and interaction, support dynamic and late binding, uniform interface support for composed resource manipulation. It supports dynamic typing, and content type negotiation is also supported. And it will support state inspection of compositions by the client. These are the properties. The computational rest is also there. It focuses on exchanges of computation rather than on data exchange. Instead of a client server nomenclature, everyone is addressed as a peer. So there is no client or a server, everyone is peers. So when you support the model of computations, now you can say that you can stop computations at a point in a node, exchange that with other node, and you can resume from the suspended point at a new node. So that is about the computation. They are saying that they don't, or it won't, it is focusing on the computation, exchange of computation, not on the data exchange. Then COAP, it is optimized for constrained power and processing capabilities of IoT. So it is a two-layered protocol, a message layer interacting with the UDP, another layer for request response interaction using methods and response code as done in your HTTP. Then COAP exchanges messages asynchronously, and it is using UDP.
Ma'am, can I ask one doubt?
Hello?
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, COEP is application layer software.
It's not clear. Application?
Is it working in the application side or user side?
See, it is a
COAP.
framework, that is message passing, how the thing is being communicating each other.
Each other
How the
meaning
message passing is,
the sensor device and processor or what did you?
it is between the components also. That can be either these two devices.
Okay, okay. Between devices.
Yes.
Okay. So crust is also the same thing.
See, everything, if you are communicating with the components, it will be with the components. If you are communicating with the later, that is the storage area, that is to that one. In whichever
Okay.
case you are, when you are communicating, different methods are there. So in which area or between these one, whichever is applicable and which are the functionalities, you just go through that one, and whichever is suitable for that one, you can select that.
Okay, okay. Depending on the type of device which we are using.
Type of devices, because one device may be for video streaming, another for your temperature. Likewise, sensors will be differing, no? So
Okay.
the necessity or the requirement of that one will be different.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, you are not audible.
Heterogeneous type of devices are there.
Yeah.
So to communicate with each other, see, with a one device to the other one. So if it is okay, and if it requires the same thing, you can go through that one. So all those one will be, see, number of features are specified. So depending upon your application, you can choose.
Yeah. Okay, ma'am.
Okay. So COAP, it has 4 types of messages, that is acknowledgement, a reset, then confirmable and non-confirmable. By using these type of messages, this will be communicated. Now the request methods, they are get, post, put, delete, and this of HTTP we have already seen, get, post, and all. So similar to that one, you can use the request methods. Now, when you compare this HTTP with your COAP, COAP is more efficient for applications on smart objects because it is engaged in frequent communication sessions. And COAP is cost effective when the battery power or source replacement prove costly. Because we know that when you are installing or when you're putting one sensor in particular location, it is not easy for you to go and replace the battery every time. Okay, if it is remotely being sensed, it's not at all possible. So for these reasons, COAP is more effective than. So whenever the charges for data communication are volume based, because in our IoT we know that it's just big data or streaming of data is there. So COAP, in that case, COAP is found to be more cost effective, and it has been found to be more beneficial in push mode than in pull mode. So these are the details. And what are the advantages of COAP? You have a compact binary header along with the UDP, and it reduces the communication overhead, and it thereby it will reduce the delay and minimizing the power consumption. We have said that, see, these are the power consumption as well as the delay. It is because of this one, that is it is having a compact binary header. Then it is using an asynchronous data push that is supported. So it will be enabling things to send information only when there is a change of observed state. See, when there is a state change, then only you want to send information. So other times it can go for a sleep. So it will allow the things to sleep most of the time and conserve the power. So when the system is identifying and change of state, at that time only it needs to send the information. And a minimal subset of the REST request supported by COAP, it allows the protocol implementation to be less complex when you compare to HTTP. So the internet or the HTTP, what are the layers and what about the complexity, the protocol implementation complexity. So regarding that one or compared to that one, when you come to the small wireless sensor networks or these types of devices, it has to be less complex. So this actually will lower the hardware requirements of the smart things, which is going to be executed in that one. So lower hardware requirements is the main thing, because it is very less complex than when you compare that with the HTTP. Now we have said about the M2M also, that machine to machine connection. So here the resource discovery, it is supported by COAP to find a matching resource based on the core link format. It has details regarding the all the resources, and based on that one it will get the information. So the draft COAP proposal, it includes the support for alternative known IP messaging, that is such as the short SMS, transportation COAP message over Bluetooth, Zigbee, Z-Wave. These are supporting. That proposal is supporting these types of messages. Now, next we'll see the coordination languages, which are the languages which are available. So we have seen number of OS for the designing of this one. We have seen TinyOS for designing. We have used the Nessie. Now, a complete programming model can be built by combining two orthogonal models. One is about the computational model, and the other one is the coordination model. These two things are to be there. You must combine these two. Now, computational model, what it provides, a computational infrastructure, and programmers can build a computational activity using them. And what about the coordination model? It provides the support for binding all those computational activities together, because there must be something there to bind these computational or computational infrastructure models which are developed by the programmers. Now, this coordination can be seen through different perspectives. Two perspectives are there. Either it can be a centralized control, and that is called orchestration, and it can be based on distributed transparent control, which is called choreography. So, orchestration, it is a definition of sequence and conditions in which one single agent invokes other agents in order to realize some useful function. So it will be having a sequence of conditions. What are the things happening? Then choreography, the definition of the sequences and conditions under which multiple cooperating independent agents exchange messages in order to perform a task to achieve a goal state. This is what choreography is going to do. So how these multiple cooperating independent agents are going to exchange the messages, because in order to complete a task or in order to achieve a goal, they have to perform a particular task, and how they want to cooperate each other, that is the thing which is done in the choreography. So number of coordination languages are specified. Linda and eLinda. Linda is a coordination programming model for writing parallel and distributed applications. It will enforce communication and coordination. The Linda model supports a shared memory store called a tuple space for communication between processes of the application. eLinda is actually a model which extends Linda. It adds new output operation, that is about the construct WR and RD. These are the two things for the input operation as well as for the output operation for supporting the broadcast communication. So that is the difference. ORC is another one. It is for distributed and concurrent programming. It is based on process calculus, and it provides uniform access to computational services. Now, the basic unit of computation in ORC, it is called a site, which is similar to a function or a procedure in other languages. The sites can be remote and unreliable. Jolie, it is an orchestration language for services in Java-based environments. The two important features are statement composers and dynamic fault handling. Dynamic fault handling will be, instead of fault handlers being statically programmed, they are installed dynamically at the execution time. So here for this one, the three statement composers are there. You can either compose it sequence, parallel, and input choice are there. Then if your statements are composed sequentially, you can use a colon operator. So if you are saying statement X colon statement Y, the statement to the left of the sequence operator, that is statement X, will be executed first, and then the statement to the right, statement Y, will be executed. If the pipe operator, it is used to compose statements in parallel. That is, if you're having this one, statement X and statement Y will be executed concurrently. So third one is for the guarded input. So the message receiving is supported for any of the input statements. If it is like this, if the message is received on the input statement 2, that is this one, input statement 1, input statement 2, input statement 3, it will be branch, if it is 1, it will be branch code 1, 2, 3. So if the input is received on this input statement 2, then branch code 1 and 3 will be disabled, and the execution will be continuing through the branch code 2, because the input was given to input statement 2. So these are the three methods how to execute something. Next is your polyglot programming. This is programming in more than one language within the same context. Also, we can say it as multilingual programming. See, we know that when you have a problem, we cannot or we are not able to solve it in using a symbol or a single language. So multiple or different programming language can be used here. And it is also called a polyparadigm programming. So in modern day, this software combines a subset of different types: imperative, functional, logical, object-oriented, concurrent, parallel, and reactive programming paradigms. So different sets of available. So one of the oldest examples of this polyglot programming is Emacs. So this combination of parts is written both in C and ELISP. Now, as an example, we can say this web application. It is based on the three-tier architecture, which will promote the loose coupling, modularity, and also a representation of polygon, because different things are there. You have your backend will be there. You have your front end can be customized. Likewise, so multiple or multilingual programming is supported here. Now, when you are going for polyglot programming, this has actually increased the programmer productivity and software maintainability in the web development. The two essential aspects in polyglot programming environment is the platform used for the integration and the different programming languages supported by the given platform. How you are going to integrate that one, and which are the different languages supported by this one. So you can identify this with the help of an inverse pyramid, and this will make use or to categorize the programming languages in a polyglot software system. The three layers in the inverse pyramid are the stable, dynamic, and domain. Now, in the stable layer, statically typed programming languages such as Java and C that provide well tested and stable functionality. So, in the stable layer, you can see the Java, Scala, C, and all. Now, when you come to the domain layer, it is less powerful general purpose technologies, HTML and CSS. They are tightly coupled to a specific part of the application. In the dynamic layer, you see Groovy and Clojure, which are more flexible, and it will aid rapid functionality development. Now, so far we have seen about IoT, and it is actually characterized by heterogeneity in various forms. A single programming language or a model will not be able to provide the complete thing. See, when you want to go for an application development in IoT, can we expect a single programming language will be able to do that one? So it is actually IoT is characterized by heterogeneities in different forms. So the corresponding programming language also must be heterogeneous in nature or multilingual. So the coordination language and a computation language is required for this polyglot programming. So this is the inverse pyramid. In the domain layer, you have your HTML, CSS, and web template, SQL, etc. In the dynamic layer, you have JavaScript, Groovy, Clojure. Then stable layer, you have your Java and all. Okay. The features of the programming frameworks. What are the corresponding features? Coordination is the first feature. So IoT will be having computing elements playing different roles. So you need to program the controllers, storage managers, and application processors. The next feature is heterogeneity. So it brings, IoT is actually bringing disparate different computing devices together for running a smart computing application. So there is, of course, heterogeneity. Then scalability. Now it is programmed to run many creative applications. So you want to add into that one. So it is scalable also. Then fault tolerance. Now this frequent system partitioning, it is due to the mobility of the computing elements. Now when you are adding one device, for some time this device may be executing, or it may be functioning. So after some time, it sometimes these sensors, if you are putting it in outside, that is weather monitoring or something like that, or if you are going to monitor something in the forest about the mobility of these, what to say, tiger or something, then we can't expect that one will be functioning. So you must make fault tolerant that things. Otherwise, there is no use of using that things. Then it actually needs a lightweight footprint, because in both in terms of the runtime overhead and or the programming effort, it must be lightweight. and it must support for latency sensitive applications. So we have many applications geographically distributed and maybe latency sensitive, because you know when the sensors or these devices are geographically distributed, of course the interaction or the communication between these two, or the data which is collected, it will be having something latency sensitive things will be there. Okay. Now, the different programming approaches in your IoT, that is node centric programming, database approach is there, macro programming, and model driven development. So, these are the approaches which we follow here. Now, in the node centric programming, every aspect of the application development, that is communication between the nodes, collection and analysis of these data, sensor data, everything will be programmed by an application developer. So, you have greater control over the way that programs work, but it is too labor intensive. It does not promote portability. That's the thing. When you come to the database approach, every node is considered to be a part of a virtual database. And queries as part of an application can be issued on sensor nodes by the developer. And it does not support application logic at this level. When you come to macro programming, you can specify the application logic. And of course, the abstractions are provided, which will specify high-level communication, and thereby hiding low-level details from developers. And it will aid in modular and rapid development of the applications. And model-driven development, it is vertical and horizontal separation is actually made at there. Vertical separation, when it is increased, the level it is actually increasing the level of abstraction, and thereby it will reduce the application development complexity if it is vertical separation is there. When you come to the horizontal separation, it reduces actually development complexity, and it will use different system views also. So each perspective elaborates on a certain aspect of the particular system. So number of IoT frameworks are available. So which are the existing IoT frameworks? A number of frameworks are available. Mobile Fog, Erlang IoT, that is ELIoT. That is, if you want, we'll discuss with each and everyone. For computing resources will be performing low latency. See, shall I go through this one? Otherwise, each and everyone.
No need, ma'am. You can skip this thing.
Okay. So I'll just go through the headings. That is, which are the frameworks. Mobile Fog is there. Erlang language for IoT. Compose API. Distributed data flow support for IoT. IoT, then Dripcast, Calvin, Simmer, high-level application development for the Internet of Things, Patricia, and these are the existing IoT frameworks. So each and every one, you can just go through the functionalities of what are the concepts, which are the what are the features, how it is going to execute. So a small introduction about that one is only needed for one. Every details regarding that one is not at all needed. Okay. So with that, we come to the end of module 2. So shall I move on to module 3?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. It's okay.
Pardon, I didn't hear.
Yes, yes, you can move on to the next chapter.
It is not chapter. I think it's the
Module.
third module.
Yeah.
After that, if I'm getting time, I'll come back to the section that is the IoT frameworks. If you want, I will explain on that one. It's only some concepts. What are the things which are maintained there? That's only thing. I hope my screen is visible.
Yes, miss.
So we'll see the data management techniques. So why you need such a data management technique? We know a large amount of data is being transferred or transmitted through the internet, or you can say that it will be transferring these data. So then there must be some method to manage this data, and where it is managed and how it is being streamed, and what is the importance of a stream processing. These things are actually dealt in this particular module. Now, the emergence of stream processing, it is actually driven by the incompetence of the traditional batch processing paradigm when it comes to the processing of fast data. See, the traditional one is you call it as a batch processing. So the concept of that one, actually, when it come to the processing of this fast and large amount of data, you may not be able to deal with that one. So there comes the importance of the stream processing. So the modern information technology system demands the ability of processing an unprecedented volume of data using possibly distributed resources and exploring the concealed value of the data within a time constraint. So you want to process the very big volume of data. That is one concept. Then you must explore the value which is actually concealed inside the data. That is, you say that multiple or number of data or the from the sensors will be getting data. Is it volume? A very large volume of data is received. So what you have to find is you have to get the value of the data, that is concealed value of the data. That is for it is actually for the decision taking steps. You can make some decisions from this data. So this is actually our main concern. Now this batch processing model derives a series of techniques to accomplish the first goal. Now when you come to the previous one, that is a batch processing one, the first one is okay. That is from the majority of data you can process that one. Now the second one, to identify, go for some analytics or the information or the concealed value of the data. That is actually a new thing. Now, when you're having the map reduce, it is a highly scalable and widely adopted programming model that is specialized in processing parallelization. Now, when you come to the stream processing, the process it will be processing continuous data that very truly to say in real time they will be processing. So that is importance of stream processing. Now, the stream processing in the system architecture of IoT, where comes the stream processing? So in the device layer, we know some sensors, actuators, RFID, maybe something is identified using this one. So you have your GPS system. So this comes in the device layer. Next is your network layer. Whether it is like intranet, internet, or whatever be the thing, you have a network layer. Then you have the service and middleware layer. Now, the application between the application layer, see the batch, you can have either the batch processing or the stream processing, or you can go for a hybrid approach. So this is the data processing paradigm, where it is stored, or where is the location of this stream processing in the case of, or the architecture of IoT. Now, what is a stream? We'll see what is the details regarding a stream. It is a sequence of data elements ordered by time. Because if you are having some data, the time is very important. Because for the mission critical weather, at a particular time period, what is the weather? And at a particular time, that is, if you are dealing with patients, at 1 o'clock, what was the blood pressure or the blood content, or you can say that heartbeat rate of a person. So time is actually very important here. So the sequence of data elements will be ordered by time. And about the structure, it consists of discrete signals, event logs, or any combination of time series data. These are all different types of data we are dealing with. Now, when you come to data stream, it has actually explicit timestamp associated with each element. Means each data will have a corresponding timestamp associated with that one. So, as a data element, the notation of a stream, you can say that a data element time pair, you can say, that is S, delta. It is the data element and the time. So where you can say that S is a sequence of data elements. The data element means it is consists of several attributes. It can be normally atomic in nature. And it is generated, its data elements are generated regularly by sensor networks or randomly produced by real world events. User clicks, you can, as an example, you can say that user clicks on a website. And delta, it is the time pair. You say that it is a sequence of timestamp that denotes the sequence of data elements. That is, at 1 p.m., this is the data. At 2 p.m., this is another data. So every data will be associated with a timestamp. And the importance of timestamp, we all know what is that one. It is necessary to reconstruct the logic sequence. Now, we know when the data is received you cannot expect that the data will be received in a particular order of execution, the same thing. So when you want to reconstruct that logic sequence, this timestamp is actually important. So for the evaluation of the real-time property of, it will evaluate that one, real-time property of the stream processing system. And this can be implemented in two forms. It can be as a string of absolute time values, or it can be as a sequence of positive real-time intervals that only record the relative order of data elements in the same stream. That is data one. If it is the first one, you can put it like that. So as a sequence of positive real-time intervals that records only the relative order. Either it can be a string of absolute time values, or it can be the relative order of data elements. So these are the two methods by which we can implement the timestamp. Stream processing. See, one pass data processing paradigm. It always keeps the data in motion to achieve low processing latency. It is capable of performing real-time asynchronous computation while passing along the information. Here, the important feature is it does not have access to all data. It is adopting one at a time processing model, and it applies to the corresponding data streams. Here the computation, it is handled by the continuously dedicated logic processing system. Now, subclass of stream processing system, you can make it as a micro batch model also. So this one at a time model, it is difficult to maintain the processing state and guarantee high level fault tolerance efficiently. So to maintain that one processing state, one at a time model will not support. The micro batch model or a hybrid approach, it will combine a one pass streaming pipeline with the data batches of very small size. Now, the application of stream processing, there are two types you can go for: data stream management systems, that is the DSMS, or complex event processing, that is the CEP. These are the two types of stream processing. Data stream management system. It is similar to your traditional DBMS. The goal is to manipulate a huge amount of available data to constitute the data synopsis, schema, or some other mathematical or statistical model. These data streams within the DSMS are joined, filtered, and transformed according to specific application logic. Now, when you come to the early days of DSMS, an application developer, they could easily set up the queries using the SQL, like the declarative SQL like declarative language. Whereas now, when the real implementation was actually left to the transparently handled by the DSMS. So queries will be initial case in the days. The queries will be SQL like, and now it is done by the DSMS itself. So the corresponding DSMS has become increasingly distributed in nature, because the systems or the devices are having distributed in nature. Now you can go for a face recognition from a continuous video stream and the calculation of user preference according to the click history. Likewise, you can go. These are the typical use cases of DSMS. Next one is your complex event processing, CP. Now here the tracking and processing streams of raw events in order to derive significant events and identify the meaningful insights from them. You can track and process the streams of data. You can implement and configure the processing logic as a set of inferring rules in the knowledge base. You will have a knowledge base, and how to process this one. You can create a set of rules in the database and store it there, so that you can use that in the decision making process. So that by the help of that set of rules, you can decide, or for a decision making, you can make use of that rules. CP systems, they require that the maintenance of state and the preservation of an event relationship be provided at the system level than the application level. Now, when you want to maintain the state of such an event, you can do that with the it must be provided at the system level. Then this micro batch model, it is a preferable option compared to the one at a time model. The major concern of CEP is to infer the needed insight from the vast volume of raw events to stream as fast as possible. Now, regarding the computation complexity, CEP logic is usually lower than that of the DSMS. And the major differences between the DSMS and CEP. Now, when you are dealing with the processing target, you can say that DSMS is continuous streams of data. CEP is discrete events. The data will be from the discrete events. Now, what are the data sources? For the DSMS, it can be video or audio stream, user clicks, social media context, like that. For the CEP, it is the sensory information, and system and service logs will be used for the calculations. Different data variety. Here it is structured and semi. Then normally CEP, it will be normally structured. Then logic implementation. DSMS, it is continuous queries. CP, even matching rules or state automating can be done. Applied logic amount, how much amount of applied logic for the DSMS it is small, but for the CP it is large. And application scenario, DSM it is quantitative analytics, and CP it is the qualitative inference. Scalability, DSMS horizontal scale out, and for the CEP it is vertical scale up. Then where the thing is being processed, preferred venue of processing. So for the DSMS, it will collect and aggregate information to a single location to achieve centralized processing. And for the CEP, the processing task throughout the data chain and bring the computation near the data source to relieve the network overhead. And for the decision, DSMS usually provide analytic results for another system to make a decision. Then for CEP, decision is based on the detected insight and inform the outside world as fast as possible. So that details will be given to outside. And what are the characteristics of stream data in IoT? The stream data is inherently dynamic, continuous, and unidirectional data flows that are normally processed in a one-pass manner. What are the common properties of the stream data? Timeliness, randomness, endlessness, and volatility. Timeliness and instantaneity. That means it is the ability to collect, transfer, process, and present the stream data in real time. Now, why? Because the value of a data may vanish over time. That is, a data which is relevant at this time may not be relevant, or the importance of the data may be lost after some time. So streaming architecture, it needs to perform all the calculation and communication on the fly that was newly arrived. At the same time, when the data is arriving, they want to perform all the calculation, and the communication must be done at the same time. And another characteristic is the randomness and imperfection. And what about the randomness? It is the data sources are independently installed in different environments. Now, some cases, tuples may be lost, damaged, delayed due to constantly changing network conditions. So some data may be lost, some tuples may be lost, some may be delayed, some may be damaged. So endlessness and continuousness. These newly generated data will be continuously appended to the data channel until the whole application is explicitly turned off. If you have a sensor and it is collecting the data, but each and every minute or second, these data will be appended. Continuously, it will be appended to the data channel. Now, this processing stream, it will actually need the support of high-level availability, which can avoid any possible interruption of this data flow. And these types of interruption, it may lead to accumulation of backlogs. And when you come to the backlogs, the breach of the real time is actually because previous data, no relevance will be there. So you need that continuous data only. Next point is volatility and unrepeatability. Most of the stream data will be discarded once they have finished traversing through the stream processing system. That is, once you are collecting this data, transmitting this data, all the things are coming through the stream processing, and this will be discarded after that time. So when you want to retransmit, or if you are suppose giving a request to a retransmission, the new stream is you cannot have that same previous data will not be arriving. So that stream will be different. So the case of retransmission is actually not the, because you are not getting the same stream once more, and the timeliness of the result presentation will be should be impaired because of the reprocessing. Now, when you are going for a reprocessing, time is a very big factor. So this is a general architecture of a stream processing system in IoT. So we have a data generation system. The data is collected from mobile apps, web crawlers, external streams, some social networks, sensors, logs. From everywhere you're having your data. And you have your data collection and aggregation system. It can be some agent will be collecting all these data. It will be aggregated. Then messaging and buffering system, which method you are going to use for messaging as well as for the buffering system. And you have your continuous logic processing system, where you can either go for CLPS, that is a continuous logic processing system. Either you can go for the DSMS or you can go for the CP. So different things are available. Both these can, each and everyone have its own informations. You can select according to your situation or which data stream must be used. And finally, the presentation system will be giving, if you're having the analytic tools, with the help of machine learning or some statistical analysis, the data can be presented. If it is a web interface, you have a web server or a RESTful API. You have now there will be the storage system also. So this is how the streaming, that is continuous logic process system, is located here. Either you can go for the DSMS or you can go for the CP. We have seen both the DSMS as well as the CP. So the first section, that is the data generation system. It's a data source that continuously produces raw information for the data processing chain. Now, the generated data, it comes in three types. One is your static data. That is long-term information that is already stored in on-premise infrastructures or remote locations. So it is actually stored there in that location itself. Centralized stream data. It only comes from a single centralized data source. From no other source, you can collect the data. Distributed stream data. This is a common data type which is applicable in IoT applications. And it will be dynamically coming from various distributed places. And that too, we know that it will be in the heterogeneous formats also. That is the data generation stream. Either the data can be static or centralized or distributed in nature. It depends. For IoT applications, the common data type will be the distributed one. The data collection and aggregation system, it will combine it with a messaging and a buffering system. And it will play the role of a message broker in the whole data processing chain. How it is being collected and what are the aggregation scheme or idea which is used inside that one. Then the storage system and the presentation system. You can have your data stored either in an established knowledge that guide for future processing. That is, in a knowledge base, you can see according to the rules, or you can go for a meaningful data synopsis. So this thing can sometimes arouse the future interest of users. Now here, the presentation system will be serving as an interface of the stream processing. You know how the data is shown to you. From the signals, number of signals will be there, but you're getting information that today it is little bit cloudy or something like that, or it a little bit sunny. So information, how the thing is going to be presented. What is a continuous logic processing system? We have seen that you can either go for the two things. And the core of the data processing chain, it is actually the CLPS. How you're going to process the system. Continuous logic processing system. So the first generation CLPS, it was actually a standalone prototype and extension of the database engines only. Either it could use your query based on descriptive language or query based on operator graph. And there are different examples for this one also. And when later it reached 2005, the second generation of CLPS was there. It comes into the distributed CLPS. And it came into three sections, or query based on operator graph, next query based on data flow graph, and next rule based on event processing language. It was actually moving, and in 2011 the third generation, that is scalable and fault tolerant CLPS, was generated, and there the query is based on the programming API. So each section, it has some examples. First one, likewise we'll see the first generation CLPS. It was pioneered by Niagara CQ and Stream, and this is suited for certain processing scenarios in which only small amount of data are generated. So that means if you have only small amount of data, you can go for this one. It won't support the high level. Now the types of operations supported by these prototypes, they are also limited. What type of operations can be done on that data? That also was actually limited in that case. Stream, it will transfer from persistent relations to transient data streams with window-based data processing and approximate query answering. This was the idea with the stream. Stream directly supports the SQL-like query language. So it can be regarded as a functional extension of traditional DBMS. And the next one is Telegraph CQ. It is CLPSs that are directly built on top of existing databases. It was developed on PostgreSQL to cope up with the high value and diverse data streams, and it enables the possibility of adaptive querying. The next one is your Aurora. It was the last breakthrough founded in the first generation CLPS. And when it came to Medusa, it was actually an extension of Aurora. It leads to scalable and quality of service oriented architecture. And the next one, Borelli's engine, it was developed on top of this Medusa in order to integrate advanced capabilities. That is dynamic query modification, result revision, and flexible monitoring. These were included in this one. It introduces the concept of replicated processing node and defines several new tuple types were also included. And the next one was coming into scene, that is System S. It was a proprietary CLPS developed by IBM. It proposed a query model based on data flow graph, and it will hide the implementation details as much as possible. Next is your Esper. It is suitable for distributed event processing that has different types of events defined. ES4 is generally the new one perceived as the first CLPS that meets the criteria of fully scalable and fault tolerant one. It offers intuitive programming. It offers a intuitive programming API, which is similar to your MapReduce, and that can be used to develop streaming applications. And the next one was the Storm. It introduced the anchor mechanism, and TimeStream adopts a task DAG to denote sequence of logical operators. So these were the different things or examples of each and every first generation, second generation, and third generation CLPS. And what are the challenges in stream processing system? One is scalability. Scalability is the ability to expand the system to catch up the ever increasing data streams. Now you want to catch up with the increase in data streams. Now that too, you must have quality of service or service level agreement that you cannot compromise that one. So you must be able to expand the system. And elasticity, that is the ability to dynamically scale to the right size on demand. Now if the according to that one, according to the right size, and what about the demand, according to that one you want to dynamically scale. That is, either you can reduce or you can go up. And this is the future and advanced form of scalability. Next challenge is robustness. You have to guarantee correctness and significance of real-time processing. Fault tolerance actually is relied on either system replication or state checkpointing. But these are not flexible enough for robustness. Because when you want to say, if you are going for fault tolerance, you must go for either some sort of replication. And there comes another problem. That is, when you have multiple copies, number of problems are there. So that is a thing. Next one is your SLA compliance. Now, in order to minimize the monetary cost for users, you have to reduce and that is about the users. Your usage cost must be reduced. Operational costs must be reduced for the providers also. So how you're going to do these things? Now, this stream processing system must be equipped with the ability to have a trade-off between the justifiable metrics. It can be either performance and robustness with a running cost. Which one must be taken? A trade-off must be between these two. Next is your load balancing. Currently, the applied load balance schemes are very simple one. Now, it will improve the performance of the system. That is by you can maximize the throughput. So when you want to load balance, the simplistic idea, or if you're taking a wrong decision, it may actually lead to a unnecessary load shedding or dropping of arrived messages when the system is deemed to be overloaded. So when you are saying, or a decision says that you can add more and more, that wrong decision may come to a load shedding or drop the messages. So that decision is very important. How to make a load balancing, that is important. So it is challenging to take the low level metrics, which are based on which metrics you are going for a load balancing. Normally, or the low level metrics are task capacity or lengths of thread message queues. These were the low level metrics. So when you are taking this into consideration during the load balancing, now this perspective is actually promising one, because the system currently is having utilization rate or you can say that it is still moderate. So it is actually going to be promising. But the thing is, dealing with the task capacity and only these two low level metrics is actually a challenging one, because it may not give the actual result. So this is about the stream processing systems. We have seen the DSMS as well as the CEP, and how you're going to, and what are the challenges. All these things are actually seen. Next, we'll see a framework for distributed data analysis for IoT. So far, is it okay?
Yes, ma'am.
So a new framework for data analysis. Why it is needed? We know that the data are distributed in the network, and the edge devices have limited capacity in memory and computational power. Because the sensor devices or the devices which you are using, it doesn't have enough or a limited capacity both in memory as well as the computational power. So you need a framework for the data analysis, where you want to store the data, how you're going to deal with the data. So this framework will support efficient local processing and summarization of the data at the nodes. And it will be followed by global processing of these local summaries. Now, this framework is within the context of distributed anomaly detection. That is the main context which we are putting upon. The framework is putting or dealing with the distributed anomaly detection. And this framework follows a similar idea to fog computing. Fog computing, we have already seen, that is coming to the edge, that is so near to the devices, not to the cloud. So here, three aspects are there: local data modeling, communication of these one, and the global data modeling. So we'll be seeing in the three aspects. What about the local data modeling? Local data modeling, gives an efficient algorithm with low computational cost. It calculates the local summaries of data, and it identifies anomalies in the local data. See how you are going to find the anomaly. If some data is anomalous in nature, you must identify that one, because when you are calculating this local summaries, the anomalous data also is acting on this one. So the average, if you are taking an average of data, one data is many of the data is coming in a normal fashion, one is very abnormal, so the average will be very much anomalous in nature. So what you're doing in the local data modeling is, it is calculating the local summaries, and it will identify the anomalies in the local data also. And only the summaries of the data are communicated to the central location. Okay, and this central location is named as sink. Now we are limiting the communication to only the data summaries, and this will actually alleviate the overhead of communicating all the data over the network. You don't want to communicate all the data, you are giving only the data summaries, so you can limit the communication. So that is about the communication. Next one is the global data modeling component. So first we are having a local data modeling, and you're limiting the communication by sending only the data summaries, and then the global data modeling component, which is located in the central location, it is responsible for finding global summaries and anomalies. Because we have number of local things are there. So the anomalies of each and every local one must be summarized, and you must find the global summaries. With the help of an example or a figure, we'll see that one. I'll show that. I'll explain it later. Now, what the thing is doing? We have the local data modeling, we have the communication, we have the global data modeling component also. Now, each node will construct a hyperellipsoidal decision boundary for its local data. Why this hyperellipsoidal decision boundary is taken? It will specify the distribution of the data very in the normal way. We'll see that one. So the data for the local model, each node will be constructing a hyperellipsoidal decision boundary. And it will send the parameters of this decision boundary. That is, we are having a hyperellipsoidal decision boundary. The parameters of this decision boundary is sent to the sink, where all the local models are merged to find a global decision boundary. That is a step 2. First one, you will send the parameters to the sink, and the sink will identify or it will go for a decision boundary, the step 2, and the parameters of the global decision boundary are then sent back to the nodes. So initially, the local parameters will be sent to the sink. It will be, every node will be sending that one, and it will find a global decision boundary, and that parameters of the global decision boundary is given back to the nodes. This is the third step. And what is the main advantage of this framework? So with the help of a diagram or a picture, we'll see. The advantages we'll see after that one. So this is the diagram of the distributed anomaly detection technique. See, local A, B, C, D, E. These are the things which is, and one more thing is there, F is there. So here, the local data, it is calculating some summary or local data. That is, see, this is a hyperellipsoidal model, or you say that it is elliptical in nature. So the result of this one summary is A, and the second node, the summary, it is B, and the third one, it is C, D, E, and some F. So these individual node will be sending the local ones. So that was the first one. So the hyperellipsoidal decision boundary was constructed, and the parameters of that decision boundary, that parameter is A. So it will be sent to the sink. This is the sink. So from this one, from the first, A is sent. Okay. And from this one, the value, the parameter is B. So from this one, B. Hello? Hello? Any problem? Hello?
Ma'am, it's okay. You can carry on. You can carry on, ma'am. No issue.
Carry on. I thought there was some interruption. Okay.
No issue, ma'am.
Okay. So the local or the parameter from the hyperellipsoidal model, each and every one, it is sent to the sink. So from here, it is given, or it is the value A, that is the parameter of the hyperellipsoidal boundary. A is sent, and from here, it is B, that is to the node. It will be traversed through the nodes only, S1 and S2. If you're having S1 and S2, this B will be there. The value, the parameter B will be transferred or transmitted. And from here, you are getting C, and from here, you are getting D. So this black direction, that is towards the sink, you can see the black arrows, this one. So from here, it is D. And then from this particular section, you are getting E also. So when you come here, this is it is aggregated, and this C from here, C, D, and E is given to the sink. And from here, you have your A, B, and F. And this A, B, and F is given from here, and C, D, E is given or received from here. So this data, or it is stored in the, or it is sent to the sink. So it's the step 2, some processing. We have said that the parameters are done, and you have to find the global decision boundary. See, now this thing, which is coming from here, or multiple things, A, B, F, C, D, E. The global decision boundary must be found again with a hyperellipsoidal model, and you are getting a parameter. And that parameter, which is a globe from the global decision boundary, it is A, capital A. From here, it was small a, B, small b, C, D, E, then F. But the global parameter, or from the global value, you received capital A. This is the parameter which is derived or processed from these entire data. So this is a global value. And this global value must be given back to all the nodes. So that is through the red color arrow. That is A, which is the value found at the globally, that value is found, and that is given to all the individual nodes. That is through the red color. You can see that is coming back from the sink to the every nodes. So A is transmitted to the 3 as well. That is a third step. First step, that is why we are saying that is 1. And the second step, it is the calculation. And the third step, the global value is transmitted. So this is how the anomaly, distributed anomaly detection is being done. Is that clear?
Yes, miss, it's clear.
So what is the main advantage of this framework? See, it is reducing the in-network communication by limiting the communication overhead to the parameters of decision boundaries. We are not actually giving the entire data. What you're giving or sending is, it is only the parameters of the decision boundary which is calculated locally. So the hyperellipsoidal model, it is actually providing robust decision boundary for different types of data distribution and can be calculated efficiently. So if you have, why it is this hyperellipsoidal model is used? Because it is providing robust decision boundary. How different types of data distributions are actually available. You know, normal distribution, chi-square distribution, or different types, Poisson distribution. You may have Erlang distribution, whatever be the distribution. So whatever be the data distribution, the decision boundary of that one will be a robust one when we are choosing the hyperellipsoidal model. That is the reason why which we are using the hyperellipsoidal decision boundary. Okay. Now this has this hyperellipsoidal model is having linear computation complexity at each node. That is another point, because it is linear, and linear computation complexity is only there. And this hyperellipsoidal model, it can tolerate some degree of noise in the training data. That is, if you have multiple data here, in some of them as anomalous in nature, when you add that one, if you're getting, you just think of an average. If you're taking average of 1 to 10, and the 11th data, if it is suppose 1000, what happens to that average? average goes to a very high value, is it? So the abnormalities or the noise of the data, if you're having, it can, the hyperellipsoidal model can tolerate that one. So that is another reason why this hyperellipsoidal model is used. And this particular framework, it can detect both the local and global anomalies. That is also possible. So that is local means it is within the node, and global means it is within the network. The anomalies in the local node as well as anomalies in the global network is actually able to detect using this particular framework. Okay. So next is anomaly detection. So sometimes you may have anomalous data. That is another thing. See, this scheme says that how this data is being aggregated and how it is being sent and getting back the data. And suppose we have some anomaly or anomalous data, you must detect that one, is it? Otherwise, it may not be getting the correct value. So this anomaly detection, it is an unsupervised data processing task. It will detect abnormal behavior without having a priori knowledge of possible abnormalities. That is, we don't know which are the possible abnormalities. Even though we don't have a priori knowledge about the abnormalities, this unsupervised data processing task will be able to detect that abnormal behavior. And what is an anomaly? It is a pattern in the data that does not conform to a well-defined notion of normal behavior. We usually see that what that student is having or showing an anomalous behavior. That means the similarity or the group, if you are considering a group, one data or number of data will be showing a different behavior. So there are three categories of anomaly. One is called the, am I running out of time? Hello.
Yes, ma'am. Actually, 2 more minutes is there to finish the time, but you
Okay.
can take your own time to finish this particular topic.
Okay, then I'll stop here because anomaly detection we'll see tomorrow. Otherwise, I
Yes,
want
ma'am.
to explain it with the help of us, examples and all. So we'll stop here then. So
Okay,
we'll
ma'am.
see anomaly detection and the other sections tomorrow. Is that okay?
Okay. Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. No issue.
Okay.
Participants, tomorrow also we will be having the same schedule, and we will meet by 10 o'clock tomorrow. Thank you all. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.